Carly visited the boat where Lynette and Brian lived for the first time since her mom went missing. The 28-year-old emotional as she imagined her mother still there.
Carly Ellsworth did not travel to the Bahamas to mourn. She arrived to scrutinize the narrative provided by her stepfather, specifically his account of the night her mother disappeared. Every element was under review: the Bahamian tides, the Abaco dock, the sailboat, and every witness who saw the couple. This forensic walkthrough would either validate his story or shatter it, and Carly returned home with 5 specific, unanswered questions. One question was voiced immediately, though it must be noted that Brian Hooker faces no charges regarding his wife's disappearance. Defense counsel denies all allegations of wrongdoing, while this report utilizes public records and verified statements from named eyewitnesses. Our analysis includes Carly Ellsworth's recorded interviews alongside various pieces of documented evidence currently held within the public domain. While the investigation remains active, Carly boarded her flight carrying more than just a gut feeling. She brought targeted suspicions. These doubts were structured into precise questions, the first of which emerged the Sunday night immediately following her mother's disappearance. Her stepfather placed a call from the Bahamas, speaking in what she later described to NBC News as a monotone. His delivery was jarringly relaxed as he relayed the news of her mother's disappearance. "Brian called and I picked up. It was roughly 9 o'clock at night when he simply stated, 'Yeah, your mom is missing.'" According to her later statements to CNN, that pivotal phone call arrived between 8 and 8:30 in the evening. The person on the line was no stranger. She had known her stepfather for approximately 25 years. She was only 4 when he joined the family, and at 28, the voice she heard that Sunday felt foreign. To a stepdaughter with decades of history, he did not sound like a man whose wife had just drowned. A daughter's intuition recognized what reporters simply couldn't. Her 56-year-old mother was an experienced hand on the open water. Lynette was no novice, sparking the question, why wouldn't she swim back? Her daughter described her as an elite athlete. Lynette Hooker possessed over a decade of sailing expertise, having sold her Michigan residence 4 years prior to live aboard a sailboat. She and Brian navigated the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean for years as seasoned maritime travelers. Stationed in the Bahamas since February, the couple documented their journey via a social media account called the Sailing Hookers. Their feed featured images from Marsh Harbor, showcasing a couple using sail life hashtags while lounging on the deck. They broadcasted the retirement dream, often discussed at dinner parties, projecting the image of a perfectly happy couple living life at sea. Carly observed the marriage from the inside, noticing that the public facade and private reality had long since diverged. The friction started well before April 4th, leading to a voicemail recording eventually obtained by CBS and Fox News Digital. Within that audio, he claimed search and rescue teams recovered the specific flotation device he supposedly threw to her mother. "Hello, honey. I just heard from search and rescue, and they located the flotation device I threw out to Mom." He explained she fell overboard and hadn't been found, closing the call with honey and an expression of love. After he hung up, Carly shared the audio with journalists, desperate for the public to hear his specific vocal tone. In her estimation, she heard a man providing a routine status update, not a husband in the midst of crisis. His cadence reminded her of someone reciting a weather report rather than a man discussing his missing wife's location. This wasn't the voice of a man recalling the final moments he saw his wife alive. She questioned CNN directly. That inquiry remains central. Why would a man whose wife just vanished overboard fail to immediately drop the vessel's anchor? Why didn't he search? She theorized that if she fell, he simply chose to take full advantage of the situation. She couldn't fathom why her mother would swim away from the dinghy or why Brian paddled toward the shore instead. Carly told CNN that if her own partner fell overboard, she would have gone into the ocean after him immediately. They would be together or at least alive. She also confessed to CNN that she suspected trouble long before April. She sensed a dark outcome was looming, noting that the prior history between her mother and Brian was far from good. Her description of the unfolding events in the Bahamas carries the heavy burden of a long-held, terrifying expectation. She essentially stated that she had always suspected this moment would arrive, and now that grim reality was here. That isn't how one reacts to a sudden accident. It is the response to a feared outcome finally manifesting. Lynette's mother, Darlene Hamlet, provided investigators with another critical layer of context regarding her daughter's state of mind. Darlene revealed on the Drop Dead Serious podcast that Lynette had recently purchased a one-way ticket back to her home. I discovered that she had already bought a ticket. She held a one-way ticket back to Miami, a ticket home, but she never made it onto that aircraft. Lynette was actively preparing to exit her marriage, which Darlene described as a cycle of brutal, volatile lows. Her mother detailed a repetitive cycle where Lynette would escape Brian, only to inevitably be drawn back again. Alcohol acted as a catalyst for his hostility, transforming Brian into someone cruel and verbally abusive when he drank. That was the baseline for his behavior, but he also turned physical, and Carly provided her own corroboration. Speaking to WZZM 13 in Michigan, she confirmed that heavy drinking fueled the instability in that marriage. Conflicts broke out more frequently whenever they were drinking, and lately, their alcohol consumption had surged significantly.
Lately, they've been drinking more, so I'm just concerned that something happened that can't be undone.
Violent arguments intensified whenever the couple drank, particularly after they abandoned a recent period of sobriety. That sobriety lasted roughly 18 months. These claims are now part of the public record established by Lynette's daughter. Beneath those statements sat two older pieces of legal history, including a documented incident in Michigan during 2015. Both Brian and Lynette traded assault accusations, yet prosecutors denied a warrant because they could not identify the primary aggressor. Brian also faced a Michigan child abuse charge back in 2006, a case that ended with a jury acquittal. These were court records, not rumors, providing critical context even if they lacked absolute proof of a current crime. Carly flew to the Bahamas with a specific hypothesis and 5 direct questions she needed the island authorities to address. She traveled with her boyfriend for support, yet the heavy weight of those questions remained hers and hers alone. These were not inquiries a typical news correspondent arriving in Marsh Harbor would have even known to ask. She had lived with these doubts for 24 years, and the Bahamas offered the first real chance to test them. Her investigation focused on the environment. Brian's story depended on the existence of a specific type of water. He described currents powerful enough to vanish an expert swimmer, separate her from a boat, and conceal her remains forever. That narrative requires a very specific oceanic environment, so Carly went to see if the geography matched the claims. The terrain did not match. Her first priority was a meeting with the investigators at the Royal Bahamas Police Force. She consulted with the United States Coast Guard before demanding to inspect the Soulmate, the sailboat her mother called home. Authorities permitted her to step onto the deck for the first time since the disappearance, a moment she later recounted often. During an interview with Andrea Canning, she described the weight of just sitting there and staring at the empty vessel. She began speaking to her mother as if she were present, trying to anchor herself in the reality of the situation. The grief was overwhelming. When I first arrived, I sat on the deck and just looked at the entire boat. I spoke to her like she was right there. What exactly did you say to her? I said, "Hey, Mom, I am here. No matter where you are, I just want to talk and see you." She admitted to ABC News that she kept waiting for her mother to step out of the cabin. To her, the Soulmate was not a sterile crime scene. It was a home filled with her mother's personal effects. The cabin was packed with small, handmade items that transformed a generic floating vessel into a deeply personal residence. Every square inch of that yacht radiated her mother's presence, while simultaneously emphasizing the crushing reality of her absence. She salvaged what she could, taking a headband her mother had frequently worn and a gold L-shaped initial necklace. Carly grabbed a handmade picture frame and a piece sewn by her grandmother, then she put on the headband. She stepped off the Soulmate wearing that headband, and she has kept it with her ever since that day. Afterward, she hired local assistants to navigate the precise route Brian claimed they had traveled on the night in question. They traveled from the Abaco Inn on Elbow Cay toward the anchored yacht, viewing the channel from the water's surface. She observed shallow stretches where the seabed was clearly visible and noted how close the shoreline remained at all times. Captain Manistee, a local charter operator, described the specific conditions of the channel the Hookers had supposedly been navigating. Water depth there drops to 4 feet during low tide and reaches approximately 10 feet at its highest point. 4 feet of water will not drown a woman, and 10 feet cannot hide her. Shore lights are always visible. Anyone separated from their boat would easily see land. Instead of a dangerous abyss, Carly saw clear, shallow flats. Even at high tide, the water appeared shallow enough that a person could easily touch the bottom and stand up. This was the moment I realized his story was entirely incompatible with the actual physical reality of this location. I am confused as to why he did not jump in, considering his height. I just cannot understand why he stayed out. This waterway is busy with boats and resorts. She told News 8 that the coast is lined with rentals and private docks. Speaking with Grand Rapids station WOOD-TV, she noted that where her mother allegedly fell, she could have swum only a few feet to stand up. That geography alone dismantled a foundational premise of her stepfather's shifting story. His narrative required deep, open ocean, but the topography revealed a narrow channel. He claimed a violent rip current was to blame. He needed a force strong enough to sweep his wife away, yet the forensic record and eyewitness testimony described calm, transparent water. The water was clear enough to see the sand. Brian's story required total invisibility, a swimmer who could just vanish into the void. He needed a swimmer who could avoid every shoreline witness, yet the topography proved this water was under constant observation. It was a high visibility zone. By the time Carly reached the Bahamas, the massive search operation had been active for 2 weeks. The Royal Bahamas Defense Force had already downgraded the mission from rescue to recovery after only 72 hours of searching. They utilized cadaver dogs, professional dive teams, and high-altitude drones. Even the United States Coast Guard joined the early search efforts. Despite those resources, Lynette was nowhere to be found. No remains, no shreds of fabric, and no personal items ever surfaced. Rescuers recovered the life ring Brian claimed he tossed, but the person it was meant for had left no trace behind. Lynette was a physically fit mariner in clear water during daylight. Local captains described the visibility as perfect to the bottom. Local captains described the channel as perfectly clear, overlooked by resorts and islands, while Lynette wore a bright green cover-up. A poolside photograph confirmed the neon garment, which should have been easily spotted by a boat or a drone from distance. Yet, she was gone. The first question shattered upon contact with the physical site, but the second test was the clock. Brian originally stated the couple left the Abaco Inn around 7:30 p.m. That specific timing was crucial to his defense. It allowed him to claim the sun had set, creating a blanket of darkness that supposedly stole his wife from his sight. His entire explanation for how a veteran sailor disappears hinges on the total failure of visibility in the dead of night. Then the footage arrived. Ashley Banfield, reporting on her podcast and YouTube channel, obtained clear imagery of the couple. The video shows them leaving the inn and walking toward the water much earlier, around 6:40 in the evening. That is a massive discrepancy. At 6:40 on April 4th in the Bahamas, the sun was still high in the sky. The sky was bright and the departure occurred in clear daylight. Official records show sunset in the Abacos occurs at 7:30. That 6:40 departure gives the couple nearly 60 minutes of usable light. The 7:30 claim puts them in the dark. These two scenarios are not the same. A 7:30 departure means light is dying, but 6:40 means there is plenty of sun. Jim Todd, a first responder with the Hopetown Fire and Rescue, met Brian the next morning and spoke plainly about the time shift. He told Banfield that the original story moved from dusk into darkness, but the new evidence moves from daylight into the evening. These are fundamentally different versions of events. You do not, he argued, simply lose a person in water during broad daylight. You do not, he argued, simply lose a person in daylight. Ken, the 38-year-old bartender at the Abaco Inn, agreed. He served Brian that afternoon and later gave a statement to the New York Post. He recalled the couple arriving early. He saw them at 4:30. The man came to the bar and his wife went straight to the pool. Because she went directly to the pool, he never really spoke with her. She just passed by him in a brief moment. During a busy shift, Brian ordered 2 rum and cokes and remained almost entirely silent during the transaction. Ken knows the area. He explained that Brian's travel timeline did not match the actual time required to boat between Elbow Cay and Marsh Harbor. He found it suspicious that Brian reached the harbor without a single witness spotting his wife during the entire transit. No one on either side of the channel saw the wife. Brian himself, in a recorded call released by Fox News Digital, broadcast the tape. Brian acknowledged the problems. He admitted they stayed too long and left the inn too late that night. He described it as a cascade of failures, but that cascade hinges entirely on a 7:30 departure, not 6:40. A cascade beginning in broad daylight suggests a completely different pattern of failure, or perhaps no accidental failure occurred at all. Brian claimed he paddled and drifted in the dinghy after his wife vanished. According to the official records, he arrived at the boatyard at 4 in the morning, creating a massive 9-hour gap from the actual 6:40 departure. He spent 9 hours in transparent water just half a mile from the coast with visible town lights and no emergency signal. He summoned no help until the very end. This timeline crumbles under the weight of daylight and the final suspicious arrival time. There is a massive portion of that 9-hour window that remains unexplained. Brian claims he yelled for an hour, which leaves, for 8 long hours, a man with a paddle and a dinghy sat within view of shore lights on 3 sides. He carried a cell phone used earlier at the Abaco Inn bar, yet he drifted slowly toward a destination without help. No emergency calls were placed. No flares lit the sky. Not a single distress flash signaled for help from the water. Neither the Abaco Inn staff nor the coastal residents reported seeing any signals or movement from the channel that entire night. Those 8 silent hours represent a critical gap in the timeline. Both forensic seams are loose. Neither has been tightened by any explanation his attorneys have offered since. 2 seams, both loose. The third test focused on the visual evidence record. Banfield's reporting sharpened this specific question, which Carly then reviewed directly during her forensic investigation of the island property. A photograph eventually surfaced showing Lynette at the Abaco Inn around 4:30 p.m. on the afternoon of April 4th. She is seated in a green bathing suit cover-up. This specific detail carries significant weight in the missing person case. Brian told rescue volunteers that his wife had been wearing a black 2-piece swimsuit, which contradicts the camera record. He omitted the green cover-up entirely. A rescue volunteer told Banfield that this omission was a massive failure for searchers. A green garment completely changes the visual signature of a body. It dictates the odds of spotting someone in the water. From a boat or a drone, the search signature changes. Searchers spent those first days looking only for a black swimsuit. They weren't looking for a green cover-up. The practical effect was that the search teams were scanning for the wrong clothing. People scanning the water for Lynette Hooker were looking for the wrong items because of the bad information Brian provided. On a recent podcast, Jim Todd of the local rescue team said Carly herself had flagged this massive forensic discrepancy. Carly told Banfield that in a missing persons case, the specific visual description is paramount for the volunteers on the ground. People need to know exactly what to look for. Brian's description to the search network failed to include everything she wore. A second image released on April 22nd showed a figure matching Brian Hooker's description walking alone toward the dock. He was carrying a yellow dry bag from the Abaco Inn. This bag has since become a recognizable forensic detail. The photo shows only one person, a man with his bag, but with absolutely no sign of his wife anywhere. This image alone proves nothing about what followed, but it creates a frame that contradicts his story of their departure. His narrative of a couple departing together on a dinghy during rough weather is not supported by this visual evidence. It shows a husband moving in isolation. Evidence beyond static photography also began to pressure his version of events. Banfield released video of the Sea of Abaco showing flat, calm water that stands in opposition to his violent claims. Brian blamed the weather for her disappearance, but his own voicemail admitted to reckless behavior and negligence that evening. He admitted they stayed too long without life jackets, a partial confession, but the environmental record tells another story entirely. The actual conditions on the night she vanished do not support the theory of an accidental ejection from the boat. A small boat can certainly be capsized by heavy waves or a sudden squall, but those elements were entirely missing. Moving through a well-marked channel on a calm evening is not where fatal accidents happen without a sudden catalyst. Fatal accidents require a catalyst. The third question sharpened here as investigators scrutinized what Lynette was wearing that day. Brian's description of her clothing was false. The image of the couple walking together is missing from the actual record. Instead of a joint departure, the evidence shows a man moving alone. His claims about the sea conditions also failed. The lens captured him alone. The turbulent conditions he blamed were non-existent according to the weather records from that hour. The conditions recorded when she went overboard do not match his story. Every visual archive points toward one conclusion. He was alone. The fourth test was context, a psychological evaluation only a family member could perform for the record. While the national press could describe the marriage, only the family knew the explosion brewing inside that private relationship. Darlene Hamlet sat for an interview and revealed that her daughter had already bought a one-way ticket home. Lynette was leaving her husband. Her mother's interview reframed the entire investigation into what happened on April 4th. That day was not just a random Saturday on vacation. It was a critical weekend inside a high-stakes countdown. Darlene also revealed her daughter had left Brian before. This marriage had a long history of serious lows. She openly feared for her daughter's safety. She described a husband who became aggressive and mean when he drank. This was not an isolated incident. It was a set of repeated signals over years that reached a breaking point. These repeated signals stretched over years, leading the family to a point where the matriarch felt comfortable speaking out. Darlene stated on the record she feared for Lynette's life. Carly's public testimony further corroborates this dark history. Darlene detailed a history of chronic alcohol abuse and confirmed that their verbal altercations turned volatile whenever they started drinking. She stated the pair had recently relapsed into heavy drinking after maintaining nearly 18 months of consecutive sobriety. This specific insight into their relapse is a forensic detail no outside journalist could have fabricated on their own. This level of intimacy originates only from the inner family circle. On April 14th, 24 hours after Brian left police custody, he abandoned the Bahamas for the United States, citing a sudden medical emergency involving his mother through his legal counsel. Just one day prior, he assured ABC News his sole priority was the search, yet Carly publicly challenged his integrity. Writing for the New York Post, she labeled him dishonest. A family member confirmed that Carly possesses enough information to cut ties forever. She refuses to speak with him again. Collectively, these facts build a scenario his defense cannot easily navigate or explain. The woman he claims was the victim of a tragic accident was, according to maternal testimony, actively planning her exit, preparing to terminate their marriage. When this man faced the choice between searching for her or fleeing the island, he chose the flight home. His behavioral trajectory before and after April 4th remained remarkably consistent and highly suspicious. To Carly, these actions do not mirror the typical grief or frantic desperation expected from a legitimate accidental widower. Darlene's public declaration serves as a devastatingly heavy piece of circumstantial evidence that anchors the prosecution's entire theory. A mother never admits to a camera that she feared for her daughter's life unless she has endured that agonizing dread for years. Darlene Hamlet described a slow, internal alarm bell that eventually rang true with the most devastating outcome imaginable. She never once claimed the disappearance was a shock. Instead, she spoke of lingering questions and profound, long-standing worry. The entire family had been terrified for Lynette. The specific phrasing a mother chooses regarding a daughter's marriage carries weight. These words do not surface in an instant. They are the final result of a long, painful realization. They follow 1,000 unspoken fears. We discovered she had actually purchased a ticket to return to her home in Miami. It was a one-way flight home to Florida, but she never made it to the terminal to board that aircraft. This single detail tightens the investigative timeline. Buying a one-way ticket is the ultimate act of finality and separation. When a wife intends to leave her husband, the final weekend before her scheduled departure becomes a dangerous, high-stakes countdown. Lynette was not part of a stable, happy union. She vanished from a relationship that was reaching its breaking point. By her mother's own admission, Lynette disappeared from a marriage that was currently enduring its final, desperate hours of existence. This context doesn't clarify the physical struggle, but it fundamentally shifts our clinical understanding of what an accident looks like. The fifth evaluation was strictly behavioral. How does a husband react after witnessing his wife drown? Which emergency numbers does he dial? Is his voice frantic? What is his immediate survival instinct? How does he utilize an anchor or a paddle in a crisis? Brian admitted his own reactions were chaotic. In a recorded phone call obtained by Fox News, he confessed to a friend. He deployed the anchor last instead of first and offered no logical explanation for this tactical failure. By the time he acted, the boat had drifted nearly a half-mile away from the precise location where his wife initially entered the dark water. He claimed he shouted for her for 60 minutes before choosing to paddle. He ignored the nearby shores of Abaco. Instead, he crossed open water toward Marsh Harbor, eventually pulling into the boatyard at 4 in the morning. Analyze his sequence of decisions. A dinghy pilot goes overboard. That person is also holding the essential ignition key. The motor is useless. A rational person would immediately secure the vessel's position to prevent it from drifting away from the victim. The anchor is designed for this. Dropping it immediately halts the drift. Waiting until the boat has traveled a significant distance covers up to a half-mile of ocean, maximizing the gap between you and the person who needs your help. By his own account, Brian chose the latter option. Then he spent an entire hour shouting into the empty night. Shouting for an hour is an eternity in a narrow channel where the lights from the shore are clearly visible. It is also far too long to ignore firing a flare, blowing a whistle, or attempting to bypass the ignition system. He made no effort to signal the dozens of nearby vessels or the occupied rental homes lining the immediate coastline. That hour yielded zero results. He then began to paddle, but pointedly avoided the direction of nearby Abaco. Abaco offers docks, medical resources, and a volunteer rescue squad. Instead, he steered the boat toward Marsh Harbor. He arrived hours later at a remote shipyard to file his report. He deliberately chose the most time-consuming route. Carly's questioning on CNN remains a sharp critique of his logic. Had he dropped that anchor immediately, he would have stayed close. He ignored the closest coastline, choosing instead a longer route that delayed any hope of saving his wife. The physics of her falling overboard feel wrong, and logic dictates she would never swim away from her only safety. A drowning woman fights toward the boat, yet he never dropped anchor to scan the surface, leaving his story completely fractured. Did the dinghy have an anchor? It did. By his own account, he was the final witness to her life, but his tone the following morning was unnervingly detached. His voice was monotone and relaxed, delivering news of a lost flotation device with a disturbing, calm tone. "Hello, honey. Search and rescue just called because they recovered the flotation device I supposedly threw toward your mother last night. She is still missing after going overboard, but this discovery allows the teams to narrow their grid during the ongoing search. They are focusing on a tighter area now, while the search teams remain on the water today." This sounded like a foreman giving a status report, not a husband facing the reality that his wife was likely dead. After 25 years of marriage, his first instinct was to flee the Bahamas just one day after being released from custody. While his lawyer cited a sick relative, Carly saw a calculated exit that revealed his true character to anyone watching closely. The man who claimed his only priority was finding his wife boarded a flight and vanished within 24 hours of freedom. While the Coast Guard and rescue teams he praised were still scouring the sea, he was already mid-air heading back home. These actions formed a disturbing pattern rather than a legal conviction, and within that pattern, any trace of grief was missing. Authentic sorrow was nowhere to be found. Carly held 4 specific questions in her mind, while the 5th remained largely unspoken. She hinted at it constantly, yet she saved the most critical inquiry for a moment that would define the entire investigation. She looked into the ABC News cameras and delivered a 15-word sentence that will now define this case forever. This central question stands apart from the rest because it ignores the physical impossibility of her mother drowning in those conditions. Carly witnessed those waters firsthand and knows they were too shallow for an accident, just as she knows the timeline fails. The official sequence of events is physically impossible, and the photographic evidence confirms he was completely alone on that boat. There is no mystery regarding her mother's intentions, as her grandmother has already gone public with the truth about her plans. We no longer ask if he acted like a devastated widower, because his behavior was clinical, detached, and entirely devoid of pain. The ultimate question overshadows everything else, as she openly admitted her total confusion over how her mother could have simply vanished. Drowned or floated away, those are her words. Note the distinction. She never claimed to be confused by the concept of drowning. She explicitly questioned the two specific scenarios her stepfather provided, rejecting the idea that either one could actually be the truth. He offered two paths, and she discarded them both instantly, recognizing that his entire narrative was built on a series of lies. That choice of words is the key, because the water there is too shallow to kill, especially with the shore in sight. No current in that channel could sweep a body away when the shoreline lights are clearly visible to any person drifting. The geography makes his story impossible, contradicting everything Carly observed when she stood at the very spot her mother supposedly vanished. The primary concern is not a matter of forensics, but a simple calculation. If the water and timeline both prove false, what remains? If the sea is innocent and the clock is lying, and if he was truly alone while she was preparing to leave him forever, if his behavior fails every test of grief, then how did her mother disappear? The question is sharp, precise, and hauntingly direct. The disappearance is an objective fact. Her mother is not in Michigan, she is not on the boat, and she is gone. There are no hospital records on Elbow Cay or anywhere else in the Bahamas confirming the grim reality that she has vanished. Carly acknowledges the loss but exposes the massive void in the official story, highlighting the impossible nature of her stepfather's shifting account. In Brian's version of events, the fall, the current, and the long paddle there is simply no logical way for her to disappear. A living woman cannot just vanish from that spot. His entire framework is fundamentally broken, and that is what Carly is declaring. This is the core of her accusation. Every reporter, rescuer, and witness has asked some version of this same haunting question. From the captains to the locals, everyone in the Bahamas is wondering the same thing, but only Carly dared to say it. She went on the record with 15 words that demand an explanation, knowing there is no innocent answer to be found here. She never filed a direct accusation, and his legal team is quick to remind the public that no formal charges exist. Instead, she simply refused to accept a convenient lie, choosing to face the harsh reality that her mother did not just drown. Simple answers are easier to digest, but she chose to hand the truth to the nation before finally heading back home alone. She left wearing her mother's headband, a silent tribute she has kept visible during every single television appearance since that day. One question remains, that is the single query she voiced publicly, yet nobody, not Brian, not his legal defense, not the Royal Bahamian authorities, has offered a response. The Bahamas Police Force and the United States Coast Guard stay silent, and so far, the justice system has made no move against Brian Hooker. Authorities took him into custody on April 8th in Grand Bahama, where investigators interrogated him for approximately 3 hours at the Central Police Station. His release came on April 13th after prosecutors advised against formal charges, pointing to the complexities of an active and ongoing investigation. Terrell Butler, his counsel in the Bahamas, released a formal statement categorically denying any criminal involvement or wrongdoing regarding the disappearance. The denial is absolute and unequivocal, while Crystal Marie Hauser, his Michigan attorney, has issued a direct appeal to the public. She urged people to grant him the benefit of the doubt, maintaining that zero physical evidence exists to support these specific allegations. No hard evidence corroborates the claims made by Carly and Darlene concerning the fate of his wife of nearly 25 years. That is the official record, and the calculated defense his high-priced legal counsel is strictly paid to maintain for the cameras. While the defense stalls, the wheels of the investigative system have begun to turn, with ABC News reporting key developments from inside sources. The United States Coast Guard now spearheads the probe into potential foul play, and a formal criminal file has officially been opened. This shift, broadcast across national networks and verified by local affiliates like WZM-13, brings one vital question into focus. Whether Lynette Hooker's disappearance was intentional is a matter now scrutinized by both federal American investigators and their counterparts in the Bahamas. Reports identify Brian as a prime suspect, though no formal charges have been filed, a technical distinction that remains critical in this case. That accuracy matters because a suspect is not yet a defendant, and a preliminary investigation is a far cry from a formal prosecution. Yet, since his release, the public record has expanded with troubling details: the green cover-up and that specific yellow dry bag. We see the calm water on video and hear the skepticism from the bartender, the rescue volunteers, and the seasoned boat captain. The captain is certain you do not just vanish in that channel, and then there is the matter of the mother-in-law's one-way ticket. Combine the stepdaughter's 5 distinct inquiries with that one singular vocalized question, and every piece of this growing evidence has hit home. This weight landed while Brian and his legal team remain stuck in a cycle of denial, though neither side has blinked yet. Both camps are fortifying their positions. Meanwhile, Carly returned home wearing her mother's headband, a gold L pendant, and carrying a picture frame. Inside her bag sat a handmade frame intended for her mother, alongside a scrap of fabric that had been carefully sewn by hand. There was no arrest waiting for her and no recovery of a body, only a single sentence she brought back across the border. That statement she gave to ABC News has echoed through every major media outlet currently tracking the details of this case. Now, those words sit at the heart of the investigation. She simply cannot fathom how her mother drowned or was swept away. The search volunteer shares that confusion, as does the bartender who poured drinks for the couple just hours before the incident occurred. The channel captain, who navigates these waters daily, remains unconvinced, alongside the photographer whose lenses captured nothing but perfectly flat, glassy water. Those photos show calm conditions on the very night her mother allegedly vanished in rough seas, and her grandmother is equally skeptical. The public, watching this timeline unfold and seeing the evidence surface in real time, is beginning to share that same growing doubt. It is difficult to quantify the impact of Carly's journey within a legal framework, since most of it is currently inadmissible in court. Her trip yields no formal discovery or sworn witness statements for a trial. Instead, it provides something else: a raw, personal field report. This report comes from a family member with unparalleled perspective, because Carly understands the history and baseline of her mother's life. She holds the deepest understanding of this marriage and can still speak for her mother, knowing every nuance of her voice and demeanor. She understood their shared mindset and what a sustained period of sobriety had built, supplemented by the insights shared by her grandmother. Her own observations confirmed the marriage was reaching its breaking point, and she carried that heavy realization with her to the Bahamas. She measured her personal knowledge against the jagged geography where the incident occurred, and the facts simply did not align with the surroundings. There was no middle ground, and that level of intimate dissection is something a daughter achieves where a prosecutor fails. It is a perspective that no national news outlet, regardless of their investigative resources or hard work, could ever hope to replicate. Brian Hooker remains uncharged. He maintains his innocence while his lawyers work the system. His wife is still missing. The water is shallow and the shore is visible, yet the daughter who went to verify a story returned with only questions. She voiced that inquiry on national television, and so far, not a single person has been able to provide an answer. If you are tracking this development and want to stay updated as the Coast Guard investigation moves forward, make sure to stay tuned. Subscribe to this channel as witnesses emerge and the Royal Bahamas Police Force takes the next steps in this complex investigation. Our reporting relies on viewers who demand that these questions continue to be asked. Note that this program is for informational and commentary purposes. Brian Hooker has faced no formal charges regarding the disappearance of his wife, Lynette Hooker, and all identified persons are presumed innocent. Every subject remains innocent under the law. Statements from family, witnesses, and investigative reporters represent their specific positions and sworn accounts of the case. Certain details involve contested claims pulled from public reporting, Regarding Brian Hooker, statements made by his attorneys remain his official and formal position. The formal record shows a complete denial of wrongdoing on his behalf. Currently, the investigation into Lynette Hooker's disappearance remains active and ongoing. No official authority has reached a conclusion regarding criminal responsibility. Any publicly available material included here is utilized under strict fair use standards. This footage is applied for commentary, criticism, and news reporting purposes. Given the intense nature of this case, viewer discretion is strongly advised. If you hold information that could assist the Royal Bahamas Police Force or the United States Coast Guard, please contact those agencies immediately. All relevant leads must be directed to those specific authorities. Thank you for your cooperation and your valuable time. Thank you for watching.